documents, and we've asked for some further information. Part A talks about the outcome of internal audit review of effectiveness, about action stays open for a period. The second action in respect of the addition of lead officer information as well as scrutiny committees of involvement. That's been proposed to close. I'm happy to close part B, but can I just check with part A? How are we going to close that out, please? And I don't know who I'm looking at. I'll look at Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, in the first instance for his comment.
Apologies, Chair. Just playing a bit of catch-up due to the technical issue we just had in the chamber. So just give me one moment, please.
Okay.
Could you move on to the next action?
Yes, I was going to say.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I think that makes sense. Okay. Action 2 is in respect of amending the final version of the Statement of Accounts to reference significant occurrences nationally and globally and to explain some abbreviations. On the agenda of this meeting, we have the Statement of Accounts. I'm satisfied that this action has been closed. I'm not seeing any objections, so we will therefore assume it's closed and move on. Item 3 is in respect of disclosure information in respect of the Welsh Church funds and Welsh Church Fund in particular, I think it was. And I think we had an email earlier this week with some information. So yet again, very happy. Yeah, two emails, second updated, providing updated information. So happy to close part A. Respect of part B, where I think we asked for an affirmation of the trustees that the grants have been made in accordance with the rules of a trust. I'm not keen to keep this action open, so I'll look to John Davis, our Head of Finance, to confirm he's happy to take this action and sort of address it when we next consider the accounts, please.
Yeah, that's an acceptable way forward, Chair. Thank you.
Great. Then on to action 4, where we sort of noted some concerns over the work programme and asked for that to be reprioritised, and that's been successfully completed. So thank you to Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, and others for doing that. So happy to close that. Item 5 was in respect of the cybersecurity paper we considered last time round. 2 items. The first was in respect of clarification in terms of how we access confidential agenda items. Thank you. I think it was Wendy who sent that paper out, so I'll consider that matter, that element closed. And the second item was in respect of further information on the audit work programme and audit results from Torfaen County Borough Council review of the SRS, the IT environment. Spoke to Andy before the meeting. He's confirmed that that's in hand. But Andy, did you want to confirm how we're going to close that out, please?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yes, just in terms of the opinions and the plan from the internal audit team at Torfaen, I will include those in the work programme going forward, so you'll have that information coming to you. And just to remind members that the outcome of their plan for previous years was included in my annual report, which came to you in July last year, with their opinions. That will be incorporated with my annual plan moving forward, Chair. Okay.
On that basis, I'm happy to close that element of the action. Could we circle back to action 1 and just make... Oh, thank you. Andy Waffen, Chief Internal Auditor, do you want to pick up the update on action 1, please?
Thank you, Chair. That work is ongoing at the moment within the internal audit team on the back of the report that Richard's presented to committee. We're aiming to finish that mid-March and present an outcome back to you and the committee at the end of March meeting.
Great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on then, please. The next item is the Statement of Accounts for the County Council. And also we have at item 6, the ISA 260. What I'd like to do is to combine those 2 items. So to start, I'll ask John Davis, our Head of Finance in a moment or so, to introduce the item, talk through the covering paper and highlight points of note within the Statement of Accounts. I'll then turn to Rachel Treitag from Audit Wales to talk us through the ISA 260, giving us an update in terms of So the audit process, confirming that the audit process has now completed, that there are no outstanding issues, and then I will turn to members for their questions and comments. Hopefully that is satisfactory, and we will sort of go from there. So start off with John Davis, Head of Finance. Could you introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think it'll be a comparatively brief input from me today. I think the committee have had fairly regular verbal updates around the statement of accounts, audit and sign off. It's pleasing to note we finally got it over the line. It represents an unqualified audit opinion once again, and I think it's fair to say that it's a very clean audit report in comparison to what we've sometimes had in the past in terms of the number of changes. The uncorrected misstatements and corrected misstatements are listed there, and won't go into them in detail. I think firstly I just wanted to put on record my thanks to the various teams that have played into bringing this together. It spans right across the local authority, and lots of sections provide data into all of this, and it's no mean feat, and especially with the pressures across the authority at the moment. I think as well, just wanted to note the approach that Audit Wales have taken once again. It's been highly constructive right through the process, reasonable and helpful with all of their inputs across the board, and that's allowed us to come to the position we've got to. So I think just to note, the committee will be aware of probably the major reason why the audit and the sign-off have been delayed. That was due to a technical issue around the valuation and disposal of infrastructure assets. In simple terms, it's to do with demonstrating that the value of the replaced component of an infrastructure asset, so the example I'd use would be a road that we own. There is an expectancy that where we resurface a road, a top layer, that we de-recognise the existing asset and take that into consideration within the accounts. It's very difficult, as you can imagine, to do that. So SIP for themselves haven't come up with an acceptable approach that's been approved to date. We did go further on this a few years back when it was first mooted, and did some significant work, but I think we need to keep that in train. I think this extension in terms of the exemption to report is through to March 25, so we need to keep our records intact and up to date to prepare for that, for whatever approach is finally agreed. I think it's fair to say we've got a lot of data comparatively compared to some other authorities, so I'm happy that we're in a good place, but we need to continue that work. But quite simply, that has been the issue that's most delayed sign-off of these accounts. Just one final point to note, I guess, is in terms of the recommendation towards the bottom of the audit report. That was in relation to related party disclosures, and just to note that the authority accepts that recommendation in full. And we've already started work, obviously given time, in getting together an acceptable approach for the 2022-23 account sign-off. So that is in train, but I think, Chair, I'll leave it there. I think the detail is there in the paper, but I won't go any further and open it up to questions at the appropriate point.
Thank you, John. Okay, could we move to then Rachel Freitag from Audit Wales to talk us through the ISA 260, please? Rachel.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chair. I'd first like to start by thanking John and the team for their support and input in getting the audit over the line. We certainly couldn't do it without their help. And so I'd like to reflect on the fact that we've got a good working relationship, very pragmatic, with constructive challenge where needed, but overall very positive working relationship between the two teams. So I'd like to, extend my thanks to John and the wider finance team as well for their work with us in getting the audit over the line. I'd like to, I suppose, firstly say we are due to provide an unqualified audit opinion on this year's accounts. That is the headline message and good news for you. In paragraph 7, you'll note that at the time of writing, we were dealing with a live item of correspondence. This matter has now been concluded, so I can confirm that we can issue our audit opinion and certificate. And the Auditor General is due to certify the accounts on Monday, the 20th. As John touched on, I went into quite a bit of detail, actually saved me from explaining all the technicalities of the infrastructure matter. So thanks, John. But yeah, that was the key reason for delaying certification of the accounts this year. Was a national issue. Welsh Government extended their expected timetable of account certification to the end of January. Unfortunately, due to the correspondence that was raised, but also to a couple of items of information that are outstanding, we sort of made a call that the January committee date was just too tight, which is why we're here with you today. And there are a number of authorities that still haven't certified their accounts across Wales. So, Monmouthshire are not alone in that respect. As I mentioned, we are providing an unqualified opinion. However, I am required to just make you aware of two incorrect misstatements in the accounts. These both relate to overstatements of year-end creditors. So the first has arisen from sort of incorrectly accruing expenditure in relation to capital projects. We've undertaken additional tests and additional work, and we're satisfied that this doesn't pose a material risk to the accounts. And the second one is also a creditors issue, which is sort of a misclassification where a prepayment was classified as a creditor and not a debtor. The sort of cumulative impact of these is below our materiality thresholds, which is why we're able to still provide an unqualified opinion. Given the capital nature of these amendments, they would have impacted a significant number of disclosures within the accounts, and would have, resulted in a lot of additional work for John and the team to amend them. So due to that and sort of the time constraints, they've informed us that they are not going to amend for them, which is fine. They're below material, so no impact on our opinion. The amendments made as a result of our report of our audit are set out in Appendix 3. They are largely presentational amendments with no impact on the bottom line. This is, a very short ISA 260, I would say, in comparison to what I've seen in previous years or with other local authorities. And the quality of the accounts that we received were of a very high. They were of very high quality, and the working papers and evidence we received is generally of very high quality as well. I will just highlight one amendment. This is to do with the adjustment to property, plant and equipment. We raised in our audit plan that there was a risk around the valuation of property assets due to significant increases in build costs and inflation over the year. The work to sort of consider that an uplift the valuation of assets was done after the receipt of the draft accounts, so sort of alongside the audit work. So I suppose this one's more of a late addition, I suppose, as opposed to an error, if you like. But that, I think, is the only adjustment reported that had any sort of impact on the bottom line. And yeah, as John touched on, I'd just like to highlight the recommendation in Appendix 4. so this related to the process to sort of compile the related party note. This is, best practice, I suppose, is an annual exercise that goes out to members to sort of collate interest, that, just to make sure the completeness of the note is there, and just to sort of just to ease that process, I suppose, really. So pleased to say that the authority have accepted that recommendation, and it should make for a more efficient accounts and audit process going forward. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, let's open for questions. And the first question from Phil Murphy, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And can I add my thanks to John and the team for, it was a considerable effort this year. There is a question associated with that. Do you anticipate any problems in the current year? Do you think we'll be closer to the deadline this time? And the second question I had was just about that overstatement of the creditors of the 361,000. Was showing a debtor as a creditor, was that just a coding error, or? Because I appreciate it isn't a material issue, but it does make a difference of over 700,000 quid. So.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah, so taking the first one in terms of deadline for this year, we're in initial conversations with Audit Wales around timings. I think we would hope that draft accounts would be prepared significantly earlier this time around. We do have additional resource comparatively to where we were last year. So we haven't finalised a kind of draft date to hand over as yet, but I would be hopeful of bringing that significantly back from, I think, the second week of August that we handed over in last year. I'll let Rachel come in from the Audit Wales side, but I know they've got a backlog in timings their side with health audits starting later. So I think it's going to be a year again where those statutory deadlines are not going to be adhered to. It's very likely we will have to make a notice that there will be delays in bringing that together. But that is going to be a challenge across, the UK really, in terms of councils and audit bodies bringing this back from a point where there has been resource issues. In terms of the second point, in terms of the debtors, I think this, I think it's important just to note that this is reflective of the situation we've had over the past 2 to 3 financial years in terms of the late grant funding that's been awarded by Welsh Government. It's caused significant administration issues around accounting for those. Sometimes these grants being notified days before year end, to then unwind all of that and account for that appropriately is a big challenge, and significantly over the last few years with reduced resources, given the challenges elsewhere in terms of finances. So we're hopeful that we'll have an approach now this coming closure to treat these appropriately. I'm going to meet with Audit Wales just before the year end, just to come to a conclusion, I guess, on where we see the core issue being, and hopefully, avoid those issues raising their head again.
Okay, that adds a bit of clarity to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just check, Rachel, did you want to add anything there, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the timetable, I suppose. John's quite right. Obviously, as we've been only now finishing our local government audits for 21-22, there's clearly a knock-on effect on our ability to get cracking with 22-23 audit work. So we are only now starting our planning work for our NHS audits. We'd ordinarily be starting that before Christmas. So we are in discussions with Welsh Government in terms of a timetable. I am confident that that those anticipated deadlines will be coming forward from January. I can't give an exact date at this time because those discussions are ongoing. But I think broadly our plan is to incrementally over the next few years bring the timetable back on track. Rather than doing a single jump back to the old deadlines in 1 year, is to sort of each year bring things back in line and back on track.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. If I may, so when John's responded to Phil's question, he touched upon resourcing, and I note at paragraph 3.7 of your cover paper, John, you talk about reduced finance team capacity and change in personnel across many of the council departments. Could you just say a few more words about the materiality of that and to what extent those issues are being addressed, please?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's important, I guess, to note where we've come from. Firstly, in terms of that kind of pandemic environment and the impact that had. In terms of the core finance team, we're looking to build on the resourcing. I think it's fair to say we've had an extended period of temporary arrangements, and my task probably over the next 2 to 3 months, as we pass the budget period, will be to finalise some of those arrangements that we've got in place. So we'd be hopeful, and I think, as I said in a previous response, we're hopeful of having comparatively more resource than we've had over the past 2 to 3 financial years to deal with the 22-23 closure period. I think across the authority and the various departments that play into it, we've started early, I guess, in terms of those discussions, in terms of what we need. So, for example, with estates who play a big part in providing those valuations, etc. We started conversations with them probably back in August, September time, right off the back of draft accounts. So, to really highlight what was required and give them enough time to prepare. I obviously won't be able to comment on their resourcing issues. I can leave that up to Peter, but I think just to reiterate that, certainly in terms of that core finance team, we're looking to make some permanent arrangements over that very shortly.
Thank you. That sounds reasonably positive. It would be quite helpful if you report back in due course when those permanent arrangements have been established, please. And if I may turn then to Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, to pick up on the point you made about the wider personnel issues. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly just sort of echo John's sort of input there. It's probably fair to say, John, it's been quite challenging, I guess, on the capacity front in the last couple of years, and it's not completely away from us at the minute. But obviously, the recruitment that you referred to will certainly ease some of that pressure. But notwithstanding, even if we're at full capacity. I think even if we are at full capacity, I think given, I think if we just reflect on the year that we've been through, the budget proposals that we're going to now bring through Cabinet and Council in the coming weeks, it's been a huge amount of work that's being needed to be done because of the circumstances and the situation. And clearly, even at the best of times, a budget setting process, the budget monitoring is very time consuming. Probably not helpful, John, with a delay in closure, overlaying that. It does create some pinch points, but I think we just got to be conscious going forward. It would be, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I was not consciously aware of the risks that we're carrying into next year. We're in a very unstable and volatile environment at the moment, and that will draw on finance teams naturally, because we've got to be really right on top of our budget monitoring, our cost control going into next year. We can't afford for another circumstance and situation to arise, such as this year, because our reserves are not in a place to be able to withstand that. The reason I give that context, Chair, is that I guess, and these are things to be worked through, as John knows. If I take a line to social care, for example. Social care is by far the most significant feature of overspend within your position, and there are circumstances that proper circumstances for why that's arisen, because of the nature of social care at the moment. However, we are not in blank check territory, and we can't go and just bankrupt the council. So clearly, the savings proposals that are being brought through, they look to try and look to continue to make that transition to bring us into to put us on a more sustainable footing. But this is where we get a bit of an interplay, really, in terms of the purest sense of just what we call accountants, and where we need to make sure that we've got the right and appropriate resource and capacity and expertise in place to ensure that those changes, those programs of change, are seen through. Because successful delivery of those programs ensures that the savings are delivered, and then consequently that we're in a good place. So it is not just capacity within finance teams; it is capacity elsewhere. We may need to take some considered decisions in terms of being able to strengthen some of those arrangements. I think it's a little bit early to sort of be specific about it, because I think some of that work just needs to work its way through in the next month or two. And obviously, I think naturally, and as will be seen from the reports that will come through now in the next week or two, there's no spoilers here, and hopefully it gives you a bit of comfort. I'm expecting Cabinet, and I've made very firm recommendation that our budget monitoring is going to be increased in frequency. We've got to step it up because of just the circumstance that we're in at the moment, the nature of the environment. But I think that's just one example of where we just need to strengthen arrangements. Clearly, there's a cause and effect on that. John's not going to thank me for that, because that's going to draw more. And again, to your point, Chair, to the committee's point on capacity. So, and I've been talking for a few minutes, but this is probably quite important. It's quite an important point for the committee, for them to just sort of grasp and understand, and in terms of rightly how you'd expect us to be responding as an officer cadre, and in terms of making recommendation up into both Cabinet and Council. So,
yeah, thank you, Peter. Very, very helpful, and what you set out there is all very sensible, and I'm sure this committee agrees in terms of the sentiments you've expressed, and would look to see see those sort of developments come to fruition in due course. If we move on then to Martin Veal, please. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Listen to that conversation. I'm worried. Audit Wales suggests that this chaos is not too strong a word in terms of audit sign-offs is going to run for the next few years, I think you quoted. And I find that a real concern, because everything that Peter's just talked about there about capacity means that we have no certainty over scheduling, and no certainty over planning, and no certainty therefore over capacity arrangements. So accounts are going to bash up against budgeting for years to come, is the kind of message I'm hearing, and I'm really worried about that. Specifically in the ISA 260 report, there's a mention in the timetable, Exhibit 1, that says the deadline was the 31st of January, and then it says that the accounts are going to be signed off tomorrow. There's no commentary on what that means. The deadline's been missed. There's no commentary at all about what the consequences are, why specifically the deadline has been missed, and I think that would have been helpful to put in there. And further down, when we get to the uncorrected misstatements, Rachel, you helpfully said you understood why the adjustments weren't made. The report doesn't say that. The report says we requested these are corrected. If it said something a little bit more sympathetic, I'd be a lot happier. And I'm kind of disappointed that it doesn't. So they're observations rather than questions.
Okay, noting the observations, I'll just check with officers and Rachel whether they want to respond in any way.
Yes, if I could, Chair. Noted the content of the ICE 260 and that those points might have been helpful, so take those on board. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. In terms of the timetable, I am aware that there will be some correspondence with directors of finance, with chief executives, with chairs of audit committees in due course. It is being worked on. I can't comment on that currently because there's processes to go through and conversations with Welsh Government, but we will be providing some certainty on the timetable over coming years, but I just can't provide that to you today.
Okay, thank you. Let's move then to Colin Prosser, please.
Yes, I think this is for Jonathan at 1.3, the financial outlook on page 12. And this, I haven't got to the bottom of it, might be just educational for me, really, is with the significance of the council tax and the council tax increases. Is that lit up on there? Yeah. Just losing my voice. I was just wondering about the obvious drag between the council valuation and the market valuations when calculating council tax, because it appears that market valuations, when we're looking at banding, are considerably ahead of those, which obviously, probably reduces the amount of appeals to the process, but property valuations appear to be ahead of the grading letters.
I might need some clarity in terms of where that is in the papers.
It's just to page 12, the financial outlook there.
Of the actual statement of accounts.
No, it was just a paragraph 1.3 on page 12, or page 6, depending on, page 6, sorry, on it's on page 6 and page 12. So a disadvantage on your phone.
If that's too difficult to answer at this stage, John, I think we'd be happy if you took that question away and came back in due course.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think I am still struggling to find the reference, but yeah, absolutely, I can come back with a written response if that's okay.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Okay, bear with me, my computer's locked. Okay, so one final question from me, John, and that's in relation to your cover paper, paragraph 3.9. The final sentence, you talk about the temporary relief introduced via sort of an update to SIPFA's code. And that temporary relief expires in March 2025. Are you able to give some confidence at this point that we'll be in a position to meet the requirements post March 2025, please? Noting, of course, some uncertainty in terms of what those requirements are.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I did touch upon it earlier. I think we did a detailed piece of work probably around 4 years ago now to identify our road networks, our road structures, etc., in terms of meterage, condition, and the recording of those. So we took an approach of componentizing those assets, and that put us in a good place for the proposed introduction of the highways network assets. legislation around that time. That was shelved by SIPFA, and we were disappointed with that because of the work we'd gone ahead and done. But we haven't thrown that in the bin. We've maintained those records. So, I'm happy that we've got the base data there in preparation for that date. I think what I'm more concerned about is probably what the revised approach is going to be. And I don't think there's a simple solution to this nationally. So I think from my point of view, we need to keep a close eye on that in terms of any consultation that takes place and feed into that. Noting that that'll come round quite quickly, and we may well be asked to do a comparative figures on that, which means that that work needs to be developed and ready to go. So I think to conclude, Chair, I think we're in a good position. We've got the data. It's just going to be a case of how we need to apply that data when the time comes.
Okay, thank you, John. You're quite right. You did touch upon it. I just wanted you to say a few more words around it, and I'd be very keen that you keep this committee informed in terms of how those matters progress, especially in relation to consultation of Audit Wales and others. And I think Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, wants to come at this point. Peter.
That's a question, Chair. If you've come to the end of your specific questions around the accounts, usually when we've taken, I guess, the accounts through Governance and Audit Committee and up into Council, I've taken my opportunity in the Chamber at Council to obviously publicly provide my thanks onto John and the teams. I just want to do that here today. It's right and appropriate that I do that. Notwithstanding, I think the point that I think Martin's acknowledged and I touched on myself in terms of the pinch points, I guess, that's been created by the delays in the audit. And I'm not going to go, Rachel. I know it's consequential to circumstance and how they played out. But notwithstanding that, probably a gross understatement in terms of some of the heavy shifts that have had to be put in by John personally, because whilst my thanks extend, and they do sincerely, to the finance teams, the management teams, and those who hold budget responsibility and responsibilities to provide information through the accounts process, and that's great that they've been so supportive. It's aided John and the teams to bring the accounts together. It's aided the audit. I'm sure Rachel as well. But at the end of the day, because I've been in this seat myself in previous years, it all lands on one person to have to bring all of that together, and that person is John. So, big thanks.
Thank you. Yes, and I think this committee will want to echo those thanks as well, both to John and his team, also to Rachel and the wider Audit Wales team. It's much appreciated. We can't lose sight of the fact we've got a positive result. That is great. And we don't underestimate, of course, the significant work required to land this in conjunction with developing the budget as well. So clearly a job well done. Okay, to conclude this matter then, we as this committee being asked to approve the accounts on behalf of the Council, and myself and Peter are intending to assign the letter of representation subject to any final comments from this committee. I will just take nods of heads that people are happy for the accounts to be approved. I'm seeing nods of heads, so thank you. On that basis, the accounts are approved. Okay. We'll now move on to item 7, which is the capital and treasury strategies. So once again, John, thank you for the papers. Very comprehensive. So in terms of contextualising this, I think we're being asked for our views and comments on the draft strategies, which will then inform the full Council's review and possible approval of these documents. Because the papers are quite detailed and rather technical. I do suggest we take each strategy in turn. So John, what I'm suggesting we do is for you to talk to the capital piece initially, the various sections of the cover paper, then draw our attention to the relevant elements of a capital strategy in the appendix. We'll then pause for comments and questions from the committee, and then we'll repeat the process for Treasury elements, and then sort of circle back to look at it in the round and to pick up any final questions and comments. I'm saying that because of there's much detail here, and there's a risk we could get lost in it. If that makes sense to you, John, I'll ask you then to introduce the capital strategy elements, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's this is quite a difficult report to bring together. I mean, I appreciate your points in taking them separately, but I think, as we note in the paper, the capital and treasury strategies are intrinsically linked. But if I just touch upon, I guess, the capital strategy first. This is very much aligned to our longer-term capital strategy, and it is and will be driven by the revised community and corporate plan once it's approved, and those enabling strategies that sit behind that plan will form a key part in driving our capital investment strategy going forward. I think it's important to note that when you look down through the report, really our core capital programme and budget is quite small. It's masked, I guess, in the tables there by our investment in the Abergavenny 3 to 19 school. And when that falls away towards 26-27, you'll note just over £10 million of capital investment year on year as our core programme. So our investment needs to be weighed up in terms of those aspirations of a corporate community and corporate plan, but also our backlog capital pressures around our asset estate, our property, our infrastructure, but also, committee will, I'm sure, be fully aware that a degree of the capital programme and capital receipts are being applied to support the revenue programme at the moment, year on year, and the pressures that we have there in the revenue budget. So these things need to be weighed up. I think it's important to note that, any additional capital investment on top of that core money would need to come from borrowing if we couldn't find it from external sources. So that has a direct implication and long-term implication across the revenue budget. Sometimes I think, as we note, for the next 50 years. So that can't be taken lightly. We do show within one of our indicators there the proportion of borrowing costs to the net revenue budget. That does sit fairly constant throughout the medium term, shown in the table there in paragraph 3.16. There is a increase in 2023-24, and that is based on, as I said, those higher capital investment plans that are currently in place and the borrowing attributed to those. But you'll see that then stays fairly constant because the borrowing levels are similarly constant through that period. I touched upon capital receipts, and there's a table which was correct at the time of writing. There will be a revised one produced alongside the budget papers, the final budget papers that will go in March, that shows that end balance in 26-27 is probably more around the 3 million level. So we have to bear in mind that there's a very limited pot there, and as we note, the with the RDLP, the local development plan, not proceeding as quickly as we would have liked. Those receipts are limited past the end of 2023-24, so really limits our ability for internal resources to support longer-term capital investment. I think, Chair, the final input from me, I think, is probably around risk, and I think I mentioned a few minutes ago about our backlog capital pressures, and there's a list of those that go with both the draft and final capital budget papers. The backlog in maintenance across our estate, is being addressed by the core programme, but our plans that feed in to those assets suggest that's not as quick as we would like, and to keep it in a suitable condition that gives us an acceptable level of risk around those assets. So that's something that we will need to address through the longer term, and as I say, those enabling strategies to the community and corporate plan will be key in that. So the asset development policy, the infrastructure policies, and such like. So I think a key it'll be a key development over the next 12 months now in terms of bringing forward a medium-term financial strategy, and that will need to be aligned with this capital strategy that's been produced to bring all of that together into a suitable way forward, I guess, in terms of addressing those risks that remain in terms of our asset condition. So, Chair, I think I'll leave it as that. You're quite right, it's a detailed paper. We've tried to strengthen the structure of it this year to make it a little bit clearer, and I think as the years tick on, this becomes a more useful document. It probably started out 3-4 years ago now as something which was on paper but not very useful in terms of our approach, but I think that's moved on now, and it certainly speaks to the wider plans that we have in place. So I'll leave it there in terms of the capital strategy.
Okay, thank you, John. Clearly, we note that the capital strategy is very much interlinked to a treasury strategy, but I did think it was easier to chunk up this paper given its nature, and thank you for explaining it so clearly. Before handing over, opening to questions from members, I do note paragraph 3.19. You say it is important that the Council understands the key risks and future aspirations for capital investment. And I do think both the Council and our good selves need to understand those key risks more clearly. I know you've talked to it and you've done a sort of good job in that regard, but I do think we need to understand those key risks more clearly, and I would suggest we circle back to that in due course, because I do want to understand what those key risks are, how they're being mitigated, and indeed how they're being monitored as we go through the period. But that's something we can talk about again. I'll pause there, hand over to Phil Murphy, please. Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Allied to that, I note that the anticipated capital receipts fall in, I can see why. But that inevitably that's going to reflect on additional borrowing. How close to our theoretical limit on borrowing are we? We've got to be starting to get a little bit tight.
So, in terms of our limit, that would be the authorised limit for debt. We are, and this plays, I guess, Chair, into the kind of interlink with the Treasury strategy. We aren't close to that limit in terms of our actual debt because of our internal borrowing strategy. I think the point that you're trying to get to is probably the implication of that level of borrowing on the revenue programme, because we need to be mindful of that. And I think I mentioned it at the outset in terms of that indicator of borrowing costs to net borrowing, net budget, and that's going to be key for us to keep a track on as we look to develop our capital investment plans over the medium term. It has to be affordable and sustainable. I think playing into that is, we've been successful over the past few years in attracting substantial grant funding in terms of the capital programme. Obviously, unfortunately, our bids to some of the more larger vehicles in terms of levelling up fund haven't been successful to date, but we would hope over time that we do attract more, and that may give us an ability to take on significant additional capital investment that allays further borrowing and putting pressure on the revenue budget.
Yeah, I could see the implications on the revenue budget. My concern was basically, being forced into a position of more and more borrowing, and it tends to start to stretch us on the top end with the authorised limit. But we're obviously keeping an eye on it. So.
Okay, thank you. Ian Chandler, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jonathan. I've got a couple of clarifications. I mean, it's just on that medium-term financial plan on the assets, the projections. Can you just clarify, just for my own understanding, is it obviously that declining capital investment over the 5 years, is that just based on existing plans of the council, or is that a restriction that actually limits the council's ability to identify new areas where it wants to invest and make substantial capital investments? So that was one question. And then I had another question around the commercial assets, tables 9 and 10, I think it is. I can't quite find them in front of me at the moment. But in table 9, I think you break down the value of the commercial assets, and some have gone up and some have gone down. But in table 10, you talk about the revenue from the commercial investments, but they're consolidated into just one figure, not broken down for each of the commercial investments. I didn't think that was particularly helpful in terms of understanding it, particularly as probably the majority of the income is coming from just one asset, the solar farm. So it would be good if that was broken down a little bit. And then finally, looking at the investment policy, particularly the bit about the environmental and social element of the policy, the investment policies, the wording of that. I mean, I very much appreciate the pressures that the finance team have been under over the past 6 months with trying to get the accounts finished and looking at the budget process and all of the cuts. Not being overly critical in terms of progress that's been made to date, but the wording of that around in terms of developing the new investment policy as required by council feels like it's being pushed into the long grass and talking about if such a framework is possible rather than how and when we're going to develop such a framework. So I wonder if you could give a little bit more clarity on that. So those three issues there, please.
Okay, could I come at that point? So thank you for those questions, Ian. I think we've strayed very sort of clearly into a treasury strategy here, whilst I did want to focus on the capital elements initially, but maybe hasn't worked as well as I hoped. John's made some notes on those questions. May I politely ask that we we don't answer those questions at the moment and just go to Martin and then sort of, if possible, if any other questions on the capital strategy, we'll pick those up now. We'll then ask John to talk to the Treasury elements, and then John can hopefully pick up Ian's points of that, then, if that makes sense.
Yeah, apologies about that. Sorry, my first question was, though, about the capital side of things, though.
It was. Yeah, okay, if we're happy, John, are you happy to pick up Ian's first question, and then we'll move on, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so in terms of the, as I said at the outset, the core programme of, I think, showing of about 11 million there in the final year, those prior years are significantly impacted by the investment in the Abergavenny 3 to 19 school and the Crick Road replacement care home. I think what we need to be mindful of is that, I guess, what we consider to be an affordable programme based on our revenue budget, the amount of borrowing that we can afford within that revenue budget. So, you know, the core programme as it stands is supported by the settlement from Welsh Government in terms of the general capital grant and supported borrowing element. There's a small amount of capital receipts supplied within the programme. But outside of that, we're very reliant on external grants, and significantly, as you'll know, in terms of the Abergavenny 3 to 19, that attracted significant grant funding, which we were required to match, but it allows us to invest and rectify some of those backlog pressures that we have. But outside of that, we have to be clear that you know, the level of borrowing that we have there within the programme is what we consider at the moment affordable and sustainable as a council. If we needed to go further than that, there would be implications within the revenue programme. So we would simply have to lose expenditure elsewhere in the revenue budget, or we increase our income through the revenue budget. So limited options, and you know, this is part of the weighing up, I guess, of capital investment, because the flip side of that is that assets continue to deteriorate, they cost more to maintain, higher costs. So it's a tricky balance, and one which those enabling plans are looking to address in the medium term, and why I guess the overarching capital strategy is so important in looking to alleviate those risks in the long term.
Okay, thank you, John. Martin Veal, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. John, thanks. Your explanations have helped sort of clarify a number of things in this paper, which I thought was a bit impenetrable in parts, so that's really helpful. And particular thanks, since you're trying to do this on your phone as well, which is an astonishing piece of work. So 50 pages on a mobile phone is like above and beyond. One thing I think you said was that obviously what happens in capital affects what happens in revenue, and you said, I think you said that the medium-term financial plan is due to be considered soon. Does this and that sit together as a pair? Because clearly capital implications, what we do in terms of funding, have revenue implications. So do the two documents effectively land at council or the final deciding body at the same time?
So I think when I spoke to the medium-term financial strategy, that will be a strategy that comes off the back of an agreed and approved community and corporate plan. We would hope to develop that now through the spring, pending approval of that community and corporate plan. And you're absolutely right that the capital strategy and medium-term financial strategy will be wholly aligned and speak to each other as one. So, the interplay between the capital budget and the revenue budget is closely aligned, and I think that's probably not appreciated sometimes across the authority and wider. So, but yes, to simply answer your question, that will be the plan as we move forward through the spring.
Okay, thank you once again, John. So if we could move on to the Treasury strategy, please. If you could say a few words about that, and then we can pick up sort of comments and questions from members. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Chair. So I guess first off, it's probably worth noting that some of the commentary in the report probably seems a little bit out of date now. It was based on figures that we had and produced in January, but it's the sign of the times. Things move on quickly, and base rate has changed already off the back of the February meeting of the MPC. So, firstly, I think that's something we'll take on board and maybe consider updating for the strategy that goes through to council on the 9th of March. I guess taking things in turn, in terms of our borrowing strategy for next year, and as we've outlined in the strategy and report, it very much aligns with our current strategy for 22-23. We aren't looking to move away considerably from an internal borrowing approach. We met with our Treasury advisors, I think, 2 weeks ago, and confirmed that was a sensible approach to continue to take in the current environment. It does give us the flexibility that we need through the year, and reduces overall costs of Treasury. I think that being said, we're always monitoring the interest rate environment. I think if opportunities came to lock in longer term at what we consider reasonable and cost-effective rates that gives us certainty, we would look at that. So we are monitoring that closely as we start the year. In terms of, and I think one of the new parts of the strategy based on recent years is the liability benchmark, and it's just one thing to note for members. I haven't got it in front of me, so I'll talk to it from memory. It's going to be an important tool for us as we go through 2023-24, and it's a new indicator that CIPFA have recommended that we accept, and we have been using it internally for probably maybe 2 years now. So it's a really useful tool. So it shows what our actual liability is in terms of our overall and historic capital investment plans, and the gap between that and our actual external debt. So that gap over the long term will need to be filled. That's either filled by temporary resources, so our reserves, our working capital, or it's filled by further borrowing. So that gap between those two things shows our borrowing requirement over the long term, and that's something that we need to plan for, and really drives what our borrowing strategy will be for next year. I think you'll note on that liability benchmark that there's a sharp drop-off in the early years. That represents our short-term borrowing that will be repaid and renewed at new rates, and that is part of the strategy as we go through 23-24 again. Whilst rates have increased from where we were, indications are from the market and from our advisors that we'll see a stabilisation of those rates. So we're not expecting too much shift away from where they are at the moment over the medium term. That is very much dependent on the UK government view of where inflation is going to go. We have to be mindful of that, and if things don't track through as is expected, we'll need to react to that during the year and keep a close eye on that. I think the one thing to note in terms of, and I guess I'm moving on to our investment strategy a little bit, is whilst the investment strategy is very much unchanged again from 23-24, members will be fully aware that in a rising interest rate environment, we need to have a close eye on our pooled funds. So where those aren't making returns that we consider are in line with the risk that those funds portray, then we'll need to have options and exit strategies for those if we consider that other investment vehicles are probably more beneficial at the time. So that's something that we've put on the radar for 23-24 to keep a close eye on. Some of those funds are holding accumulated capital losses. Obviously, over the last 2 to 3 months, those losses have substantially reduced because of where the wider markets have improved based on the certainty returning to the markets. But it is something that we need to keep a close eye on. I think it's fair to say that we probably won't be looking to extend those pooled fund investments now, where we previously planned to perhaps do, based on the fact that we hold and must hold 10 million minimum of investments to meet MiFID requirements. I think one of the key things in terms of the investment strategy is the interlink with I mentioned our borrowing strategy in terms of internal borrowing, and that's using our internal resources. I've explained to the committee before that what that does by using our internal resources is kind of makes us bounce along the bottom in terms of cash flow. What that does is it makes it quite difficult for us to look at long-term investments. So, whilst we're not saying no to those, I think it's probably something that will continue to keep short-term in terms of our investment balances as we move through the year. We don't consider that those long-term returns are going to provide any tangible benefit to us in terms of returns when compared to the reduction in debt interest that we avoid by using those investment balances. So I think just finally to note, there's a range of prudential indicators and treasury indicators that we'll report against during the year. And one of the requirements of the code, the updated code, is for us to report more regularly into this committee during the year. So we will be reporting quarterly. So we're just designing our plans, I guess, in terms of what those reports look like, and the timing of those coming through to committee. So I'll be able to give a better update on that as over the next few weeks. Just finally, I think to touch on the environmental and social governance aspect and the proposition that's in there. And I guess talking a little bit to Councillor Chandler's point, we had a meeting with our advisors around 2 weeks ago and talked at length, I guess, to this area. I think it comes back to the key thing for us of the two things really. Number one, that the information available is very immature at the moment, and the frameworks that we can look to rely upon are still developing. So we would be reliant on our advisors in their capacity and where they advise us to provide us with some of that detail. And they were clear with us when we met with them that, that isn't fully available at the moment. It's something that's developing and hopefully will develop quite quickly. And, if we are reporting through quarterly to committee in the new year, we can keep you up to date in terms of that progress. But secondly, we have to appreciate that some of these investments are multifaceted, very complicated arrangements around, where their money's invested, where they themselves invest and such like. So, time and resource will be required to keep a track on that. And I'm not saying that's something we shouldn't do, but it's something that we need to consider in the wider resourcing of the team in coming to an agreed approach in terms of our policy. So I think just to finish, we have made a commitment there to prioritise investments during the year that are signed up to the various charters around responsible and ethical investing, and that's something we will look to do in terms of our various investment vehicles that we use. So I'm going to stop talking, Chair. My voice is going, and put it back to you. Thank you.
So thank you, John. Very helpful. Maybe in the first instance, I'll check in with Ian Chandler whether he's satisfied with the answer on the ECG point, and just to check with him whether you've answered the third question Ian posed. Ian, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. I suppose I'm sympathetic to the resource requirements for this, but it's not a new area. ESG investment is not something that's new or innovative. It's got a long track record. So I suppose I'm a little bit surprised that your advisors aren't immediately being able to call upon existing models that are around there, because I think, as I said, there's plenty there. There's been stuff. I was working on this 20 years ago when I was running up campaigns in Oxfam. So I think there's a lot of things that have happened, and there's a lot of ethical investment advisors and firms from Schroders to others. So I suppose that is a little bit of a challenge back to your financial advisors about actually, are they really drawing on this? So I suppose that's there. But I'm willing to be a little bit patient, because I know that the time pressures and the resource pressures. But I think that part of the answer, saying that that they're immature, is something that surprises me, shall we say.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. I think probably my lasting point will probably be, we are meeting with the advisors regularly. We are looking to commission that piece of work around committing to that policy development and coming to a framework that we can use. So I think, whilst I take your point that progress isn't where we would have liked, I'm hopeful, without digging a hole for myself, that we'd be able to give you, some substantive updates as we move through 2023-24 and reporting into committee.
Thank you. Martin Veal, please.
Thanks, John. To pick up on Ian's earlier point about the investments and the returns on investments in the commercial section, as he rightly points out, Table 9 has a list of commercial investments, and Table 10 has a summary of the likely income from those investments. There's a little section a little bit further down which talks about where you have assets which are held for yield. You need to do regular reviews of them to make sure that we are holding them for the right reason. Yeah, power 12.9. Do we retain the asset, increase the returns? Do we dispose the assets to retain, or do we maximise return on capital in another way? it says something about you need to do it regularly. How regularly do we do that? And is that something that comes back to this committee, or this investment committee, I guess, would see that, wouldn't it?
Thank you. So at the current time, yes. At each meeting of the investment committee, they would assess those options, and the exit strategy would be considered alongside all of those things that are listed there. In the background, we don't just rely upon that regular meeting. Both the estates team and the finance team are in regular contact around the positioning of those investments and the returns, and whether the returns justify the risk and the heightened risk that they represent. I think what we have to appreciate at the moment, and I take the point that we haven't split out those returns. They do provide a net income stream and continue to provide a net income stream for the authority. And if we moved away from that, we would have to fill it with something else. I think whilst we've had a situation through the pandemic that we've been impacted by the dynamics in play, and income has been reduced, we're still generating a net return from these. The exit strategy, we've looked at that. We've developed our thinking in terms of what that would actually mean in terms of disposal, because it's complicated, it's technical, and it's multifaceted. So we need to keep on top of that, and we are with the states teams in terms of if that return falls below levels that don't align with the risk, then those other strategies and options need to be fully considered.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. On the face of it, if we put the two tables together, revenue, gross income from commercial investments worth 3 million per year on a valuation of 30 million is a 10% return, which is terrific. But I'm a little intrigued by the word gross in their gross income. What else happens? What's the real return to the council from these investments? Do you have a short answer there? Or?
The table there is a requirement of the guidance to provide gross income. I think when we were putting it together, because it's a new table that's required, we didn't think it was overly helpful. But I think the point of the table is actually to demonstrate that we're not overly reliant upon commercial investment income as a proportion of our budget. And that's what those percentages are trying to represent. So, and ones that we'll have to keep an eye on as we move through time. In terms of the net income, that's all contained within our regular monitoring reports, and they vary from asset to asset. Obviously, particularly the solar farm doing very well at the moment in the current environment. So those returns vary, and I take the earlier point that perhaps we could have split those out, but we have to bear in mind that the format of some of this strategy is heavily prescribed by the code.
I'm not sure we got to the bottom of gross versus net, but I'm assured that the investment committee sees that stuff, and I think that's the most important area. I'm worried we're straying into other people's territory here, so I'll take that under advisement.
Well, John, could I just check, what's the current status of the investment committee then, please? I thought it was being dissolved, or maybe I've misunderstood.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a fair point to ask, and there has been, I guess, a natural delay as a consequence of the focus needing to be put in and around the budget. So I don't like throwing excuses, but unfortunately, that is one that is caused a natural delay. But I think in terms of where we were, and I guess the understanding of the committee and yourself, we're still intent on bringing a paper through and in front of council through governance and audit committee and scrutiny beforehand. But the starting point for that is investment committee itself. We will be looking to convene an investment committee in the coming weeks. That will be to satisfy two reasons, because the committee needs to meet regardless as an investment committee to obviously review performance and to allow that report to be received. I would have loved to have been able to have done that probably just on the cusp of Christmas or just thereafter, but we've just not been able to achieve that. Obviously, all the usual and ordinary arrangements in terms of monitoring and overseeing the investment portfolio remain in the background. I have spoken to Nick Keys, the development manager in Estates, who I guess holds court on this in terms of senior officer. I've asked Nick to consider putting an update to the investment committee members via email correspondence by way of interim and ahead of us meeting, convening the investment committee together formally. But I'd expect this to be coming back through the governance and audit committee. It won't hit the end of March meeting. It'll be the meeting subsequent to that.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, if we move on, Tony Keir, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Can I just check you can hear me? I've got this new gadget.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. It would be useful for me putting my sort of bank manager hat on here in terms of, you've got a snapshot of the value of commercial investments, see a trend analysis in terms of what they were and how they've gone year on year, because the value of commercial investments can go up and down depending on the nature of the terms of the lease. And I think that would be useful to understand. And also in relation to the income that has been received since those investments were first made on a year-on-year basis, to see how much income the council has been receiving, which is contributing towards the services that we have seen. So that's something I'd like to see. I don't know what the rest of the committee would view.
So thank you, Tony. I agree. And if this is coming into our sort of domain, once the investment committee, a decision is made to dissolve the investment committee, I think we could work with John and team to define what MI we want to see. But that's my personal view. John, comment, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think, it's a fair point. I mean, we do regularly report returns through our budget monitoring processes, but I appreciate that doesn't often give you the comparative ability to look back over returns year on year or period by period sometimes. So I think it's something we can look to develop as the responsibility passes over, and look to certainly develop those indicators or measures that the committee will find most useful in terms of keeping a track on continuing performance.
Okay, thank you, John. Were you happy with that answer, Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason, I mean, it's of interest to me, obviously, with my background, but I think also during the budgeting process, there have been comments made with regards to the controversial nature of these investments, is how they have been described. Yet some of them, obviously, well, they are there to bring in income. And I think it's important that all of us as new councillors understand where things have started and what the income has been contributed to it. So I think there will be an increased focus on it, particularly if the corporate plan, when it is finalised, potentially does look or may as an opportunity to divest some of these assets.
Okay, thank you. Phil Murphy, please.
I don't think it matters so much now, Chair. I was going to bring up the future of the investment committee and how much was going to come onto us, but you asked the question, so.
Okay, thank you. In that case, Rodri Guest.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, the commercial activity section is all geared around supporting revenue streams and economic regeneration. I was just wondering, making the assumption that the solar farm is probably the biggest contributor to that overall revenue, and then given Greener Gwent, sustainability agenda and things like that, I was wondering, is the council, are we looking at either increasing capacity or different sites to replicate the good work that's going on at Oak Grove?
Apologies, I was just trying to clarify the question. Sorry, if I understand the question, just a question as to whether we're going to go further in terms of
more additional sites, making the assumption
yeah.
that's where a lot of the revenue's coming from in terms of those streams.
Yeah.
It's profitable given Greener Gwent, sustainability agenda,
sure.
Ukraine, things like that.
Yeah, so I think if we talk about investment strategy away from the treasury management element, just in terms of, and I think that's hardwired to your point in terms of furtherance of the council's policy objectives. So, for example, if that is a means by which we can assist in delivering on those policy objectives around decarbonisation, to your point, housing, etc., and some of that. All of that having a commercial lens applied to it, because if we're able to obviously further delivery against those policy objectives and do so by way of generating a return to the council, then that's a great outcome, notwithstanding the need to manage obviously the commercial risk that comes hand in hand with that. But to the specific point on solar farm, there are sites that are being brought forward and put into the replacement LDP, both by ourselves and in terms of our own land, but also by other landowners within Monmouthshire. So, and that's contestable argument, I guess, but that's a good thing for Monmouthshire in terms of its contribution towards the climate emergency.
Thank you. Colin Prosser, please.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on the Newport Leisure Park, as looking at the national picture now, this is the sort of area that councils have had some spectacular failures. I mean, we're not in that funding area that such as Thurrock or some of the other losses, but there also have been councils that have been quite robust in trying to resist these regulations that can impact our external funding. So I'm just thinking about what we intend doing with Newport Leisure Park could well be impacted upon by our ability to fund it going forward. So I suppose I think we probably need an exit strategy, even if we don't intend exiting, in order to get that sort of fluidity to the, because it's a liability. It depends on where our external funding, whether it's going to impact or is we're going to effectively block it going forward in what we intend to do with that asset.
So if I maybe just cover this off quickly. Point is very well made. The need to review the exit strategy is done at every point the investment committee convenes, whether it be for Castlegate or whether for Newport Leisure Park. So that assessment is undertaken at each point. We are, and John will know because John was in the meeting with me a few weeks ago where I met with both John and Nick Keys, just to sort of understand and work through Newport Leisure Park in particular. It does differ in our portfolio, given some of the constraints, some of the tightening that has occurred through the Prudential Code, and the talk of the experience of other councils. That's one of the reasons as to why that tightening's occurred. Newport Leisure Park is outside the county boundary, as distinct from Castlegate, and it is. Is it the right time to sell it now? And I'm just saying this in with it, taking politics completely away from it. No, it's not. You would not, if you were an investor, look to sell it at this point. However, there is good interest, in the site, despite the climate that we're in. Without anybody in this room who's got any sort of investment development background, they will understand that it is much better selling an asset of that nature if it is fully tenanted than not. And clearly, we want to take the opportunity to address some of the voids that we've currently got within Newport Leisure Park, and then clearly there'll be decisions that are not for me, but for others to take, and in terms of whether we execute a sale or otherwise.
I think just one further point in terms of that. I think you speak to the constraints that the code puts around PWLB borrowing. We are clear in terms of those code guidelines that we aren't inhibited in terms of our ability to access PWLB loan funding, and that goes further in terms of the code in terms of our ability to as one of the options to look to make further improvements in that site if we were such minded. Clearly that would need to be off the back of it generating an appropriate further return in income, but we're happy in terms of our review of the code requirements that our ability to access funding is not inhibited at all by the existing investment we have in Newport Leisure Park, which was, as we all know, prior to these additional arrangements coming in place in terms of the Prudential Code.
Okay, look to conclude this agenda item, but just check members, there's no further questions or comments. Okay, to remind members, we've been asked to share our views and responses to the draft capital and treasury management strategies, and as appropriate, endorse their onward circulation to council. Hopefully, John, you've had some useful feedback which you will take on board and share this feedback with council when these matters are considered by them. Okay, there's nothing more. I suggest we move on. Thank you. We'll move on to item 8.
Chair, could I just
Please,
sorry to interject. I have a commitment and I have to leave the meeting. I should have left 5 minutes ago, my travel time is already being affected, but I'm just cognizant and aware from some feedback from the pre-meeting that you may have some questions, or the committee might have some questions for me with regards to the next 2 items. So I know I'm slightly putting you on the spot, but if there is anything by way of the ordering of the latter 2 items and any upfront specific question you potentially want to land with me that's possibly not appropriate for Andrew to answer, then I'll leave that to you to consider, but I will need to leave in the next 5 minutes.
Okay, no pressure then. Right. Okay, so at the pre-meet, I think I'm okay to say this here, Andy Waffen, Chief Internal Auditor, notified the fact that he has resigned and we're looking to leave the council shortly. Clearly, this committee is congratulated Andy on his appointment, very well deserved, but that does pose some challenges for you as Deputy Chief Executive and Line Manager to Andy, and some concerns for this committee, especially in respect of the paper shown as agenda item 8. And I've taken soundings, and without wishing to sort of jump to a conclusion, we are uncomfortable with the proposed removal of one FTE from the audit function structure, and are minded to recommend to Cabinet and Council that proposal is not sort of implemented. We also then sort of are interested in terms of how the interim arrangements following Andy's departure are going to be managed, with a view to ensuring that momentum is not lost across the audit work programme, bearing in mind sort of, the current situation, and then sort of more fully, how you are looking to replace Andy. Those are the general points. I don't know, Peter, what, if any, of those points you feel able to talk to at this stage, noting that clearly sort of we would be interested in terms of how these things pan out over the course of the next several weeks and months.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. These are very, very valid questions from yourself and the committee. I think if I was in your shoes, I'd be asking exactly the same questions. I'm going to be open and candid, I guess, because number one, Andrew's now formally ended his notice in, so that makes it a little bit easier to just discuss it. Like you, I'm delighted, not delighted obviously that Andrew's leaving, but delighted for Andrew. It's an excellent opportunity that presents Andrew, and it's very well deserving. So, and he knows that because I've told him so. But just in terms of where that leaves us, I've been very open. I've had Andrew's colleagues in the team approach me. It introduces some degree of natural uncertainty. And I've just been very straight, just saying, look, you've got nothing to worry about. They've got my backing and support. I know they've got your backing and support as well. I've just sort of said, look, we're in an arrangement here with Andrew in terms of the sharing with Newport. Newport is Andrew's employer. It's a shared chief internal auditor post. Under the arrangement with Newport, my counterpart Marion in Newport well understands that he will need to furnish me with an interim chief internal auditor, to which we are entitled to share half of. That's a conversation that I've already had with Marion a couple of times, and he's left with that dilemma to work through. But Andrew knows that there is somebody who is sufficiently experienced to have the potential to maybe step up on an interim basis into that role. I don't think I'm saying anything inappropriate in sort of saying that. Whether that comes to fruition or not, I think that's something that we need to work through, and I will with Marion and Newport. Further to that, and I'm assuming, can I confirm in terms of the appointment?
It's a provisional offer at the moment.
Okay.
So don't mention names.
Yeah, so a provisional offer has been made in terms of the audit manager post. I'm confident that will be accepted. That's great. Just in terms of, beyond Andrew moving on, the wider concern of the committee, just in terms of the vacancies that have been sitting within the team. So that's great. I'm, on the basis that converts, what I saw, because I sat on the interview panel, we're going to potentially be in good hands in terms of, the individual who's hopefully coming to fill that post. I hear your views in terms of the budget saving. I have already, on a preemptive basis, taken on board the comments that you've personally shared with me, and I'm sort of not surprised that those have been echoed by the committee. So I've taken steps just in the background to make sure that if that is something that relays itself strongly, which I think is what is going to happen, and that's going to be made known and minuted, then clearly Cabinet will need to now draw some conclusion in terms of accepting that. And if that is what Cabinet are minded to do by way of reversing the saving, then that's I guess from your perspective is a good outcome. and combined with obviously the appointment, it's putting the team in a better position going forward. And if in fact that is what Cabinet does, then we will not wait in terms of looking to recruit, therefore, into that post. In terms of the Chief Internal Auditor role, in terms of where that leaves us, I've talked to the interim arrangement in terms of beyond that, and it's exactly the same thing I've said to the team. You would expect me to be exploring all options. There are wider collaborations, and some of those conversations are being explored already. I'm not at liberty to sort of go into that at the moment. I'm not going to refer to which collaborations they are, and I'm not going to refer to the conversations I've started already, because it's not appropriate for me to do so. But I'm obviously keen, as you'd expect, probably Marion and Newport to be equally keen, because he is in, I guess, he's in the same situation, to make sure that we have we get as quickly to a point of having resilience and stability and full capacity. It's what you need as an audit committee. But just to finally conclude, I don't, Myron can speak for himself, I guess, but I don't have huge concerns in terms of the short term or going through the remainder of the year. You know, I'll be making sure that that interim Chief Internal Auditor post is resolved quickly, that there's no gap in effect in terms of Andrew looking to step away. And then we will make sure that those arrangements hold, and until such time as we draw conclusion, and for the future of the team, whether that leads us to looking at another collaboration of sorts or otherwise, that'll be something that will come back to the Audit Committee, the Governance and Audit Committee, rightly and properly to take consideration of. So it's probably as far as I can go, and I think I've probably been pretty open in terms of where we're at. So.
Okay, thank you, Peter. On that note, please feel free to leave, and yes, wish you well on your travels. Okay, right, for purpose of this minutes then, I think it'd be sensible, Andy, if you introduce the paper for the committee then to ask some questions or comments, and then we come to a resolution. Thank you, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out some factual and contextual information, which will hopefully enable you as a committee, if you so wish, to then provide comments, through the Deputy Chief Executive and through to Cabinet on the Council's formal budget consultation process. So in terms of the regulations, we have a set of standards to comply with, the public sector internal audit standards, which are across all internal audit teams across the whole public sector of the UK, and they are quite rigorous standards, and we need to demonstrate we are complying with them. In terms of internal auditing, within the organisation, we are independent and objective assurance providers. And we need to demonstrate that as part of that in terms of compliance with the standards and how we undertake our day-to-day activities. So at the end of the day, we are providing assurance to you as a Governance and Audit Committee, but also to senior management on the appropriate and effectiveness of risk management, control and governance process within Monmouthshire Council. And how do we do that? Well, we provide assurance via the opinions on the individual audit jobs, which hopefully members are now aware of, but the definition of which is included in the appendix. The opinions which we use in Monmouthshire are based on strengths and weaknesses identified in the audit work which we undertake. So we're giving you the assurances in terms of good, bad and indifferent opinions from all the work across all directorates and all services. As part of the standards, I need to ensure that the internal resources are appropriate, sufficient and effectively deployed to enable us to give you that assurance and those opinions. If I feel that is being impacted at all adversely, then I need to make you aware of that. and in part, this is what this report does. So prior to COVID, the team had been very stable for 7 years, but following COVID, we had several secondments, 2 vacancies out of the team, 2 of which are ongoing. The secondment has been replaced internally, and as Peter's just mentioned, to add a slight complication to the resource issue, I will be leaving the organisation in April. So currently we have 5.5 full-time equivalents, with me as the 0.5 on a shared collaborative basis with Newport Council. The current plan, 22-23, is based on delivering 658 operational audit days, and that was on the assumption that both the audit manager and senior auditor posts would be filled by the end of September. In terms of the plan itself, we originally have included 35 opinion-related jobs in the plan. That's increased to 38 based on conversations that committee members have had, and we've now brought forward follow-up work from previous year's work to make sure we're giving you a more timely opinion. So we're looking to complete 38 opinions in the year. On average, a senior auditor would contribute 180 operational days to the plan and deliver about 10 opinion-related audit jobs in one financial year. The gross cost of the senior auditor in the team is £44,500. So why am I informing you of this information? The key issue is that due to significant financial pressures currently facing the council, all service managers within the resources directorate were required to provide a contribution to those budget pressures and efficiency cost savings. Within the team, the only thing that we could propose was a member of staff. Our budget is pretty tight on non-staffing issues, and that was to contribute a £44,500 saving by taking one senior auditor out of the establishment. The impact of this would be that we would reduce the audit plan by 180 days, we would reduce the opinion-related jobs by 10, hence giving you less assurance, hence giving me less assurance that I could provide an overall opinion at the year end, and providing less assurance to you as a committee on coverage across the whole organisation. We may be in a position where some risks that we've identified in the plan may not get audited or would need to be pushed back in the audit planning cycle. Areas of high concern could be audited on a less frequent basis. Within the team itself, if we lost a member of staff, there would be reduced capacity to provide financial advice to ensure there is appropriate and sound financial stewardship of public money across all services. Also, the capacity to investigate investigations of fraud or theft would also be reduced within the team. Additional pressure would be put on remaining staff to deal with ongoing audit work, provide financial advice, and remaining staff would need to broaden their knowledge and experiences across a wider range of services. We would be in a position where we would be potentially impacting negatively on a proactive auditing, where we provide training on sound financial management and fraud prevention. Ultimately, a smaller team is more difficult to recruit into and limits development opportunities for those remaining and has a negative impact on morale. Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andy. Right, questions or comments? Go to Colin Prosser first, please.
I was just going to perhaps touch on the general point that, since we've come on as lay members since June last year, that it's been a regular part of where we've been asking questions that that the executive and Audit Wales have been using the capacity difficulties of audit as mitigation for some of the information that we haven't been able to obtain or the capacities that we've had. So I mean, I think that we probably need, because you've very much sort of put your professional opinion that, you know, the audit work that has been completed to the adequate standard. But it still sort of begs the question, I think, going forward, that not having those senior people, you know, subordinate to yourself in office on an ongoing year-by-year basis, that can't harm the audit function and harm our effective scrutiny of this committee on a standing basis, really. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on it in that sense, that, you know, that we have accepted that mitigation during the audit cycle, which I think going forward, and I think that would be perhaps part of the reason why we would reject or certainly object to the proposal, which is a common public sector proposal, goes with the kindness principle, because there's no one in post. I appreciate that, but I still think, nevertheless, that it is. For me, I would say it's an unacceptable risk and a poor use of or a poor selection of funding reduction.
Thank you, Colin. Any response, I presume?
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Colin. And just to put that into context a little bit more, I mentioned we've got 38 opinions in the 22-23 plan. We've done a projection of where we think we're likely to be. We're going to hit around 70% of the completion of the plan. 70% of those opinions will be achieved, so that's around a kind of mid-26 opinions by the year end. I think, in my professional opinion, anything less than 20 opinions, then I'll be having to caveat my opinion in my annual report, because that is, we're getting below then the levels of appropriate assurance I can give to you that things are working well across all service areas.
Thank you, Andy. Move to Martin Veal, please.
Yeah, on a very similar theme, actually. You say in 3.9 here that 180 days is about 10 opinion-related audit jobs. Given what you've just said, we're going to be flying very, very close to the wire, and this, of course, is before the potential gap of having no head of internal audit either. So I echo everyone's sentiments in saying that I was against this as a proposal before we knew about your departure to pastures green. I am even more sort of against it now. So I echo everyone's sentiments in saying I think we need to sort of raise our concerns in the strongest terms.
Thank you, Martin. Phil Murphy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think everybody's on the same theme here. Andy's just given us some figures. You know, he thinks he's going to hit 70%. You know, why not 100? We know why not 100, because we've never got enough in the team, and taking one out is just going to make it worse. And that could drop us below the 20. You know, sometimes savings are not worth making, and this is one of them.
Okay, thank you. Peter Strong, please.
Clearly, in the end, it's going to be the Cabinet that decides on whether the appointment is made or not. But it would be very remiss of us not to draw the attention of the Cabinet to our concerns and the implications. It's not the sort of thing that the public are going to raise in the public consultations. I guess we're probably the only people who have seriously looked at this. So, yeah, decisions with the Cabinet, but they need to know what the implications are. So, I'm fully in agreement with the other speakers.
Thank you for that. Let me try to form a sort of a set of words which describes this committee's sentiments. And Wendy, I have emailed you this proposed resolution. So, whilst recognising the budgetary challenges facing the council, this committee views the proposed removal of one full-time equivalent from the audit function, representing circa 18% reduction in headcount, as having a disproportionately adverse impact on the function's ability to provide the necessary levels of independent controls assurance. Further, the committee notes the resignation of the Chief Internal Auditor, which when considered alongside the proposed headcount reduction is likely to result in an unacceptable level of discontinuity and adverse impact on the audit work programme. Consequently, this committee recommends that the Cabinet and Council do not proceed with this proposed reduction in headcount at the current time. That's just my draft wording. I'm looking to members for some nods of heads or some comment, please.
We'll go with that, Chair.
Thank you. In that case, if you could minute that, Wendy, and then sort of pass that form of words to onto Cabinet when they consider the budget proposal. Thank you. And just in case you haven't captured it, Wendy, clearly this committee formally congratulates Andy Wathen for his new role. It's well deserved, and look forward to working with Andy at some time in the future.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 9, which is the Internal Audit Progress Report for Q3. So, Andy, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Q3 update for the performance of the team and the assurance that we've given you as members of the Governance and Audit Committee via the opinions which we've issued. Hopefully members will now be familiar with the format of the report. So if you're happy, Chair, I'll try and be as efficient as I possibly can and just use the appendices to explain where we are with things. So if I could take members through to Appendix 2. In terms of the overall assurance that we're giving to committee, to date we've issued 13 opinions at either draft or final stage. 4 are substantial, 8 considerable, 1 reasonable, no limited, so which is a good position to be in. And the detail of those individual reports are then listed in the table below. No major concerns coming out as a result. Members will note that at the end of the table there are 3 individual jobs which are unqualified, and those were grant claims which the audit team do on an annual basis. We've also included some non-opinion work where we've added value across the organisation, either providing audit advice, going through the implementation of previous audit recommendations, and also involved with the closure of the imprest account and the annual governance statement. In terms of the performance of the team, can I refer members to Appendix 3, please, Chair? I've got an annual quarter-by-quarter comparison. So we can compare quarter by quarter each year and between years 21-22 and 22-23. The highlighted column, Q3, is the quarter we're talking about. And members will see that we've achieved 52% of the plan up to Q3 against a target of 50%. So the team is pulling out all the stops given the vacancies which we've already talked about this afternoon. The average number of days to get a draft report out is 4, well within the target of 10. And the average number of days to issue a final report is 8, which is again just below the target of 10. The percentage of recommendations being accepted by clients is 100%, even though we've target is 95%, and a further report will be brought back to Governance and Audit Committee very shortly, hopefully in March, with feedback from the 21-22 action in terms of implementation of those recommendations. The feedback we get from the auditees, I've included that as non-applicable this time around, Chair, because the number of feedback forms we've had is not significant to warrant it would be disproportionate, I think, to warrant a percentage. So I'll make sure that that information is chased up and presented to you by Q4. So there's a complete set of performance indicators. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Martin. Martin Veal, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Andy. Just to help us, I guess you will still be with us in March, so it might be our last hurrah. But it would be really helpful if you've talked about it in presenting it, but it would be helpful when the table is presented. It says, here's the list of things we were going to do, and here's the list of things we've done, and these are going to be done by the end of the year, and these aren't going to be done by the end of the year. And if we had that kind of analysis, I'd know how worried to be before I rocked up, because you provide us with some assurance, but it would be really helpful for the assurance to be in the paper. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make sure that's done, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments come through, so thank you, Andy. We note the progress report, and indeed, sort of very good progress being made in terms of the audit opinions issued. Thank you. Okay, move on to item 10. Item 10 is the forward work programme, and set out in your pack are the proposed papers for our next meeting on the 30th of March. Any comments or questions with that? Not seeing any. Okay, we note that. We're now on to the minutes of our last meeting, and as per usual, we'll turn the pages and I'll look for people to approve and second these minutes. So I'm starting at page 217 of your pack. Any questions or comments?
Can I just the front page always kind of slightly annoys me in terms of format, because it suggests that somehow the lay members are a lesser breed than the chair and the other members. We are listed as also in attendance, which feels a little mealy-mouthed when we are members of the committee. The officers are in attendance, we are members. So if that could be changed, it would sort of settle my blood pressure every time I read it. Thank you.
Okay, let's manage Martin's blood pressure if you could, Wendy, by making that minor tweak. Okay, over page 218, and so please shout out if any disagreement with what's drafted here. Page 219, page 220, page 221, and page 222. Could someone propose we approve those minutes, please?
Happy to approve, Chair.
And second, Martin. Thank you. Okay, and finally, note the date of the next meeting, which is 30th of March at 2 p.m. Finally, thank you all for your attendance and contribution. It is much appreciated. Are we off? Okay, thank you all seriousness, great. And thank you, John. Okay, you've done a sterling job there, okay. Talk of a technology issue, it's absolutely